This is my tech video, just an overview of what I think my biggest contributions to this project were in one simple format. To start, this title screen before the art and it was just a grey box. Everything that was the base game mode was done by me during our first Monday session. As our lead was talking to the other leads, I decided to just give it a go and try and plan for how this would work, because our game is mini games, so every game needed a way to be separated so people can work on them separately. If everyone was working in a player, we would have 10 million merge conflicts where we were in GitHub. So I planned to have the player originally didn't have any code in it at all. Obviously that changed over time. All it had was, I think, get the game mode and get the player's controller. And the idea was every game mode would use template. Every game would use template. They would have a map, everyone would use the same player, but they'd have their own controller and their own game mode. That way all the code for how the game functions would be in controllers, so when they go into that new map, that new minigame, the controllers would take over the code. Obviously some stuff with the player now having pure functionalities that is across all game modes got added, so items and respawning and dashing got added, but the core functionality was in the controller. This is now in C++, but it was setting up the IDs, so player 1 is 0, player 2 is 1, 3, 2, 4, 3, because it started at 0. And then that's all this had. If it also had interact put into it. And then the game mode had the multiplayer, which I'll talk about in a second, and setting up the IDs within so the game mode would have a reference to these IDs as well, because we had the update points functionality, which was originally put in here, where the controllers would tell the game mode, hey, this is how many points I've got and this is who I am. The game mode would then hold on to those points and be the ruler of those points, if you so wish, and then tell the instance at the end of the game, which is bound up here. At the end of the game mode will tell the game instance, this is the overall points for your overall leaderboard, which the instance would then handle. I did set up the game instance, but I haven't done I helped with this code because I understood the mapping of how the points were allocated, but this was not fully made by me, just partially. I also did the level camera. It's a smaller thing, but I liked the camera because if we had one map, I was very aware that someone might try to move that camera and it would look weird. So I thought if I made a camera, made the map, stuck the camera in the map as well as all the players, then all anyone would have to do if they were making a game would just duplicate that map and not touch anything. Sock, who's a designer, made a diagram for people to use, which explains it slightly better than myself because I'm not the best at diagrams. But that was the original diagram back in week 0 and week 1. Then once this was made in week 1, I moved over to the minigame team where all the people in tech got assigned certain minigames, and mines were Coin Collector and then Paint Rush. When I was making Coin Collector, I realised we didn't have a timer, and as it was minigame, we needed a timer, so I made one. Originally this was GMC Coin Timer, because I just made it for myself. And then eventually people realised, we have a timer, so everyone just used this one and it got renamed. But my main reason I looked at this is because I used time spans. So reason I picked to use time span is because I wouldn't have to do any of the math between seconds and minutes. So originally there was minigames planned to be a minute and a half long, a minute long, in which case minutes would be really necessary. So instead of having to check every time, is there less than 60 seconds? Is it still in a minute? If I use the time span, it would just cut that out, and I can drag off minutes and seconds, and it automatically, when you deduct from a time span, it automatically calculates it for you. Which some people didn't know, so I did have to explain to people that, but once people got the hang of it, it's why we picked my timer, because it was just the easier way to do it, especially when it came to UI, which I will say later when I move over. So Coin Collectors was my first minigame, and this is the player controller. The reason I haven't chosen every single actor I've made or touched, because I would be here for about 10 hours, especially when we get to the C++. But a basic overview of my player controller design, kind of how I code my controller. How the game worked is there's a spawner at the top of the map, and then I'll play the game as I talk about it. There's a spawner at the top of the map that spawns coins every, I don't know the time now, but eventually sometimes it spawns bombs instead. The idea is the bombs act very similar in design wise to Mario Kart, is if you get hit, coins burst out of you. Like if you get hit in Mario Kart, coins burst out of you, as that was one of our games. There was also the hammer item, that when you hit someone, it acts in a very similar way. It stuns them and coins burst out of them. However, I did not implement the hammer item fully until later in C++, and even then I only just changed a few interfacing, because at the time I didn't have the hammer, and someone else had a minigame with a hammer and they took it on because I had a lot going on. With the hardest bit with coin collectors was the maths behind the coins. So how this works is, if this iUpdate coins is used for negative and positive amounts. If the amount is positive, then the points get added similar to any other scoring. If the amount is negative, that is divided by 60, or minus 60. The original amount worth for the coins was minus 60, which meant the points minus 60 would be the amount of coins the player should lose. These points then get translated down here, and if the player does not have enough points per the worth that it would be for the amount of coins, it only does the less amount. So, easy way to explain it, if I had 70 points and I got knocked, the usual amount to be taken away would be 3 coins, which would be 180 points, but I don't have that. So instead, 2 coins would be taken away from me, and I'd be getting... 1 coin would take away from me, and I'd lose 60 points, and I'd keep the 10. That was how it was originally designed. Obviously, it has been updated since then, so I do have screenshots of the old code further up, but then design came in, and they have tweaked some stuff. The next game mode I did was Paint Rush. So the bomb, in Paint Rush there is a bomb that you can throw and paint tiles, but you can also paint tiles by walking over them. How it works is, this is the bomb. When the bomb explodes, it gets the ID of whoever was controlling it and takes their colour. These are the colours representative of the player. That colour would then burst out of them and colour the tiles around them. This is the paint tile itself. This is the colour, how it colours the tile. So all the tiles themselves are just the same tile, same material. The only difference is they all have a vector parameter, which I used to take the colour, put it in there. That's how they set the colour of the tiles, because it felt worse to just do 4 different materials. It was the better, more efficient solution in my opinion. And what this does is if player 1 has stepped on it and it's turned red, then player 2 steps on it, it's going to turn blue. Player 1, we should remove points. This is this code. And then when we step on it, we gain points. So the multiplayer, which I forgot to mention, was also done by me, and I have not done networking code, multiplayer code, none of that sort, so I was going to this very blind, and we're using controllers, so everything was just a little bit more difficult. The idea behind the multiplayer was you connect 4 controllers, you play the game, and then your player is yours throughout the game. There's no switching, no nothing. And to be honest, when I was doing this, I was searching for any node that included player, because I thought, and if like player, online, anything like that, I just searched for it, and there was create local player, which I then looked into, and it takes whatever controller ID you put in and creates a player for it. It creates a version of the player, and if you put -1, it takes the next available controller. So if I plug in 2 controllers, controller 1 is connected first, whichever ID I connect. So if I disconnect this controller, it's ID 0. So when I play the game, this controller that is ID 0 is created first. The next controller is then also created. And this does this for how many players there are. Currently the default is 2, which changes when you start the game anyway. And then these local players are created every time the level opens, which is why it's important every time the game opens we make sure those IDs are the same and consistent, which is why there is a stored version on the game instance. The issue is that we do have a bug of, if you disconnect 2 controllers and you plug them in the other way round, so if controller ID becomes 0 to 1, 1 to 0, then they swap players, which is not what we wanted. However, we couldn't really do much about it, so this was week 7, and I gave it a go to basically, when a controller disconnects, tell the game it's disconnected. And then what would happen is, when a controller reconnects, a pop-up would appear in the top window with the 4 UI icons of the characters, and you would pick which player you were. So if you did swap controllers, you could still pick your person. However, that proved to be a lot more difficult because I've never done something like this, and it never really worked, because this event, Connect Manager, happens when one of the connections change. However, the issue is, it's called for every single controller, no matter which one has changed. So you have to find which controller has changed, because they're all calling. So if I had 4 controllers in and disconnected one, this would be called 4 times with connect, 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 disconnect. Which, this is the reason we scrapped it, is because if I had started this in week 2, I would have had time to get help with it, because I've never done something like this. But I did not have the time, so we had to scrap it. However, fun thing we did learn is that how controllers work with Unreal is it gets the forward direction of the actor and sets that as forward in the gamepad, which is fine in first person, but the second it comes to this type of third person like aspect, if the player is rotated 90 degrees, that forward direction becomes forward, so your axes become swizzled. It was very weird, And it explains a lot of the errors I was getting when I first made the project, and they were turned around. But it did mean we had to hard code setting the rotation back to 0, 0, 0, which I just didn't like because it looked a bit janky if we disconnected and the character suddenly just turned round 90 degrees or 100 degrees and just... It felt off, and I would love to go back and work on this more and learn how this system works in much more detail, because it did interest me. We just don't have the time because I had to move on. After the multiplayer, the game modes, all my mini games, I moved on to the C++ team. So we split the tech team into programming and C++. After the multiplayer and my mini games, I moved over to the C++ team. So we split tech between blueprinting and C++. The C++ team was just me and Reese, who is a games programmer. So I became C++ lead in some sort of a term because I had the most experience with C++ within Unreal. He knew C++, but not Unreal's little quirks with C++. So I became in charge of it, meaning I had to plan for C++. My plan was, we wanted some of the classes to move into C++ for pure efficiency reasons, and so that other people couldn't change them, mainly the interfaces, because we had, at the time, 13 different interfaces, which some did one function, and it was a train wreck. So I decided to move some interfaces into, well, this is Rider, C++. Reese took on the smaller classes that would have less of an impact on the game itself, just so he could learn. I do realise that I have decided this for him, meaning that some of his stuff won't get put into engine. However, because of how much tech we had and the rate we were going at, I prioritised safety of the project. So I did give myself the harder classes, and this was back in week 3. And back in week 4. Entire week 4, I wrote these classes, and then the weekend, I went through the entire game and changed almost every class to work with these new C++, because all the interfaces were mixed in, so when I combined them to controller, game mode, item, player, I had to change everything that used anything to do with any of those items, which was everything. When I did that, I created an Excel sheet of everything that I was changing at the time. And it was band neutral, just the basic, just so I can understand what I had finished working on and find references, was not using any of the old BPs and just tick them all off, because it was a long process. How I designed the C++ classes themselves was, if it is a bigger class, to only declare it. So the player, it looks like it has a lot. At the time, this was all that was in the player. But this is me declaring all the functions that were there to do with the dashing, the respawn, and then all of its variables, and the default designer variables had put in, so we had a default backup. But in the CVP, there's nothing. Because all of this was changing so quickly, it was only so we had a base of a player that we could refer back to at all times. And this was what was decided between myself and Reese of what is needed for the player. However, some of them have functionality in C++, such as bomb coin as my example for interfacing. This is when the bomb coin explodes and we're trying to find out how many coins to remove. So some other stuff that I've done is that the point UI, this is the UI that sits in the bottom of the HUD down here and tells you how many points and gives you little pop-ups when you get points or you lose points. So I didn't create the point point UI was originally up here and it was just black and white. I didn't create that code for adding points. I also didn't create the point notification itself. However, those two weren't working in tandem. The point notification had the old UI design and it was not up to date with GDD. And it also needed to be changed because it wasn't functioning correctly, as in it wasn't adding points correctly. What this notification was taking was the points in total, not the difference. And the points themselves had no way to tell the difference. So, say, player had 400 points and gained 40, this pop-up would say 440, which it just needed a going over and was what I was tasked with for a while to get fixed as one of my bug fixes in that team. So I had to add storing old points and working with the delta, which is the point notification itself. And I added the arrays of their colours because they were not the right colours. These have been changed now from art to be less saturated. But I also had to work with this get position because originally this notification was not attached to anything. It was not being called from anything. So I was hard coding canvas points and with X and Y playing the game, finding where it is, which looking back was a horrible way to do it. And I could have changed it there and then, but at the time it was a bug fix and they just wanted it working, so I just got it working. So over the time of bug fixing and everything else, I spent a lot of time on UI. Mainly the UI plugin to work with controller, because Unreal does not like controllers. It does not like working with them. Nothing is set up functionally to work with them, really. So I had to install a plugin called UI Nav to be able to do this within the controller. So I didn't make the pause. The pause menu was my job. I didn't make it. I had to transfer it over and then change almost everything about it to make it work because, again, Unreal doesn't like controllers. So how the pause menu is set up is it's using WBP base button, which is this. This is a UI nav button, the plugin button. It means it can be focused using a controller and you can navigate, if there are multiple of them in a vertical box, horizontal box, you can navigate through them all. So I had to separate the buttons because originally the buttons were not separated. So I had to separate them, add them back in. The widget switcher wasn't me. But unfortunately, because the buttons changed, I had to add set focus. In each of the widgets, they all got their own set focus. Because setting active widget didn't work. Setting focus did, but there's set user focus as well, which didn't work. This is just what worked. However, the issue we have is, one of my bugs was when you press B from the settings menu, for example, you want to go back to pause menu, it would close quickly, the focusing wouldn't work, it just closed the widget entirely but wouldn't unpause the game. So this focusing was a pain because it just didn't work half the time. So when you press the settings button itself, it opens settings, which is its own widget over here. But when you pressed B to go back, it would close. So my fix was adding a delay. It's an awful fix, I don't like it. I wish there was a simpler way. I could not figure out one. I tried changing the input from triggered, completed, started, all of them, nope. I tried changing the modifiers to be press and hold, press, tap, all of them, nothing worked. Only the delay. And it had something to do with the focus, because the focus is the only thing I had to delay, everything else was fine. this was still an issue in the build, because I fixed this issue with delay. It worked perfectly for all of them. When we got to the build, control and exit was suddenly stopped working. Sorry, settings exit stopped working. And we're going to fix it. So we got rid of back, and back just closed, because we didn't have time, unfortunately. In terms of my highlight feature for this pause menu, it would be the sliders. So the sliders are also their own thing, which, because of this UI nav, it wanted everything to be its own thing, and everything to have a button as well. The slider, you cannot set the default variable of this slider. You just can't. And I press 0.5, it goes to there, I compile, it goes back to 0.0. Every time. I can't change it, which caused a lot of errors when trying to set that value using the save game, which was just recently done today by me. And it just did not work. Nothing was working. So, but if you do it through the widget, it's fine. Which I found out after a lot of testing. But if you do it through the settings and just call the widget, it's not fine. Talking about calling the slider, it relates to the save settings. So when I play the game and I open my settings, if I can, this is the saved version of what my settings were. And I can change them, I can make the graphics low if I want, and then I can open it up and it's still the same. I can exit my game, play it again, and the settings are still the same. This was annoying with the sliders again because they would not set, and then I found out who made the previous save system had tried to load the game in 2 different places, which caused them to just override each other, not function, and just cancel each other out. It also would try to call these value changes, which are just bound to when you change the slider, before the load has finished happening, causing everything else to be overridden. This took a while and was really annoying, but on the technically now, it is really sound because everything has been taken off settings and is now on the game instance. Originally it was all on settings, but now everything's moved over to the game instance. Finally, just a smaller thing, I was in charge this week especially of adding all the UI art in and going over it all with May, the concept art lead, and making it all nice to her standard, because I can't see some of the smaller niche things she could see. For example, this was slightly off-centered, even though it was centered here. Because of padding, it was slightly off and she could notice it. I could not. The main art I added was to do with some of this. So these characters over here were designed, but they were never put in. So I added them in with a widget switcher and used the name of the games and set them to their widgets. This is less technical, but was a lot of back and forth with art and design. All of the UI I've changed was a lot of back and forth to get it perfectly right. So a lot of my task was just communicating. For example, A, they wanted slightly bigger than B, but I had an issue with, if you can see here, the padding around these UI is massive, which caused padding issues, especially with the exit, to get them to look right, because there was so much padding around them, they didn't fit the boxes. So I did talk with art, and unfortunately we can't go back through and change all of the assets because all of them have this padding. But it is something I would take on for my next collab, is to ask art to remove as much padding from the assets as physically possible. And also make the assets of a similar height, because the pause menu was another big thing we had to change art-wise, is that when we press settings, this changes to options. However, the pause art and the options art were made in wildly different canvas sizes. So when I replaced pause with options, it got squished, and vice versa. And as a result, I had to have a lot of different UI made just for us to test. So as you can see, there is a lot of different versions of pause. So this is a roundup of just everything that I think is worth noting. Obviously it is all still in my forums as well, however this is just a quick video that you can put on 2x speed to quickly understand where I think you should look if you were to go down looking at the code, or where I think my best technically wise was done, especially with the C++ and sorting all that out within the engine and just reworking a lot of stuff.